Welcome back, and now for the news in detail. In Ankara, Turkish and the Russian officials have agreed on the details of a ceasefire in Syria's Idlib region. Turkish state media quoted Defense Minister Hulusi Akar as saying joint patrol since last month. Russia says Israeli attacks on Syrian territory have increased tensions in the region. Speaking to media, Foreign Ministry spokesperson Maria Zakharova said Moscow is concerned over Israel's continued airstrikes. Zakharova said the Israeli practice of delivering unilateral airstrikes violated the sovereignty of neighboring Arab nations. She said that such arbitrary actions undermine regional stability. In a relevant context, Zakharova said consultations are being held between Russian and the Turkish defense ministries to guarantee implementation of the ceasefire deal. Syria has been struggling with a civil war between President Bashar al-Assad's government and rebels since 2011. The war in Syria has almost entered its 10th year. Damascus residents say they are lucky there's less violence around the city today, but the trauma from the past battles lingers on. What in this report?
Conflict grew out of popular protests against the regime of Bashar al-Assad in 2011. It then morphed into a violent insurgency and civil war after the government responded with crushing force. Since then, over 511,000 people have been killed. Some measure of calm has been restored in the capital Damascus after years of fighting. However, residents say they're still struggling to rebuild their lives.
How can I forget the war? Even after 10 years, I can't forget it. The war took the people dearest to my heart. It took my only son, Mazin, and it took my left arm from my body and left me with a permanent fracture in my leg. It took my house and my car.
There are others who have suffered even more gruesome injuries. One displaced resident living in a refugee camp near the border with Turkey has lost both his eyes and legs. Ibrahim Al-Ali's body is like a map of his miraculous but horrific journey through the bombing campaigns of northwestern Syria.
I was on my way back from work and was wounded by a landmine. That was the last day I saw the world. The landmine led, as you see, to my right leg being cut at the knee and my left leg also at the knee. And I lost my right eye completely and my left eye completely.
Most Syrians simply wish for a home they can call their own, where they won't have to worry about evictions or bombs from the sky.
I hope to have a home that no one can make me leave. Whether awake or asleep, I'm dreaming about this because I'm tired of being displaced.
There are around 5.6 million Syrian refugees around the world, with an additional 6.2 million displaced inside the country. Much of the fighting is now restricted to the country's northwest, in and around Idlib province.
The head of the U.S. military Central Command, General Kenneth McKenzie, says the threat from Iran is still high. He was addressing a Pentagon news briefing after the U.S. carried out airstrikes against an Iran-backed militia in Iraq, killing 5 soldiers and a civilian. The strikes were conducted in retaliation for the killing of 1 British and 2 US personnel in a rocket attack in Iraq on Wednesday. Earlier, Iraq said 6 people, including 3 soldiers, were killed in US airstrikes and 12 others were wounded. The Iraqi military called it targeted aggression against the country's armed forces, saying it violated its sovereignty. Meanwhile, Iran has warned US President Donald Trump against taking dangerous actions after the airstrikes in Iraq. In a statement, Foreign Ministry spokesperson Abbas Mousavi said Trump should reconsider the presence of troops in the area. Iran's response preceded the Pentagon statement in which it said the US targeted 5 weapons facilities belonging to the Iraqi Kataib Hezbollah militia. The Taliban have called on the foreign nations not to make comments about the future administrative structure of Afghanistan. In a statement, the Taliban said the remarks by international community on Kabul's internal matters violate the Doha Agreement. It said the Afghans will chart a course for their future in a free atmosphere. The statement comes after the head of the U.S. military Central Command, General Kenneth McKenzie, said the Taliban's current actions are unhelpful for intra-Afghan talks. Indian troops have killed another youth in occupied Kashmir's Baramulla district. The youth was killed during a search operation in the district. 35 people have been killed in the occupied valley in the last 2 months. The valley has been under a curfew and communications blackout since India stripped the region of its autonomy last August. The United Nations and the international community have urged India to restore normalcy in the region, but New Delhi has kept the restrictions in place. Pakistan has decided to shut down academic institutions countrywide until 5th of April in the wake of the coronavirus outbreak. The decision was made at a National Security Committee's meeting, which was presided over by Prime Minister Imran Khan. The meeting also decided to close western borders with Iran and Afghanistan for 15 days as a precaution against the outbreak. It also decided to cancel the annual military parade in the country. There are 22 confirmed coronavirus cases in Pakistan with no fatalities. China says the US Army may have brought the new coronavirus disease to Wuhan, the epicenter of the virus, while Iran's Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei also implied the outbreak can be part of a biological attack by the US.
In a tweet, Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs spokesperson Li Jianzhao said Washington owes Beijing an explanation. The statement comes after US President Donald Trump, in his address, called COVID-19 a foreign virus that started in China. US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo also referred to the coronavirus as the Wuhan virus. Meanwhile, Khamenei in a statement called on Iran's armed forces to help the government fight against the disease. He said the measure could also be a form of biological defense drill.
Iran has reported 85 more deaths from the new coronavirus in the last 24 hours, bringing the overall death toll to 514. In a televised address, a health ministry spokesman said the total number of the patients has crossed 11,000. Several politicians and officials in Iran have been infected, with some dying from the illness. The latest suspected case of the infection was Ali Akbar Vilaiti, who advises Iran's supreme leader on foreign policy. Meanwhile, security forces have been ordered to clear streets nationwide within 24 hours in a bid to contain the virus. The measures were brought into force after Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei ordered the armed forces to lead the battle against the coronavirus. China has reported single-digit new deaths and confirmed cases for the first time since the novel coronavirus outbreak began. The National Health Commission says 7 people lost their lives and 8 more were infected in the last 24 hours. As the epidemic appears to slow down, local governments have been ordered to revive their economies. Tech giant Apple has reopened all 42 of its branded stores in China. The country's industry minister, Xin Guobin, said outside Hubei province, 95% of the large firms and businesses have returned to work. The number of people who have died from COVID-19 in the country currently stands at 3,176, with 80,813 confirmed cases. As COVID-19 fear looms large, the US believes North Korea to have cases of the new virus that has killed over 4,900 people worldwide. Speaking at the Pentagon, the head of the US forces in South Korea said North Korea hasn't flown a plane for the past 24 hours. General Robert Abrams said the military forces of North Korea were on lockdown for about 30 days. He said that country started their routine training only recently. Abrams said he was fairly confident the country had the cases of the virus. Sandwiched between China and South Korea, North Korea has not yet confirmed any coronavirus cases, but it has stepped up border checks and imposed quarantine measures. The US has praised South Korea's response to the coronavirus crisis and its drive-through screening clinics. Speaking in Washington, US Reform Committee Chairwoman Caroline Maloney said America should be leading the world, but she said the country is lagging behind in responding to the coronavirus outbreak. Maloney said Seoul tested scores of people quickly, but the US couldn't even test a fraction of that number. Responding, the health experts say the shortage of diagnostic kits have made it difficult to gauge the full scale of the outbreaks in the US. Since the outbreak, over 1,300 cases of coronavirus have been confirmed in the US, killing 33 people. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has called for an immediate formation of a unity government to tackle the coronavirus pandemic. In an address, Netanyahu said he is asking for an emergency national government for a limited time. He said it was necessary to form a government to save the lives of the citizens. Netanyahu's opponent, Benny Gantz, said he was willing to discuss the proposal. He said such a government should include representatives from all the parties in the parliament. The ruling Likud party and the rivals Blue and White party failed to secure a majority in March 2nd elections. It's time for a short break. I will be right back. Stay tuned. Welcome back. The African Union has called on Libya's warring sides to immediately open talks on a political solution to the civil war. The call was made after 3 African heads of the state, the African Union chief and a senior UN envoy met in Republic of Congo. It is their second meeting since the Berlin summit in January. In the German capital, leaders agreed to end foreign interference and impose an arms embargo on Libya. Tripoli's government of national accord has been battling Eastern Commander Khalifa Haftar since the fall of dictator Muammar Gaddafi in 2011. International efforts to end the conflict have stumbled, and Libya's African neighbors have been seeking a wider role in solving the country's crisis.
The contact group reiterates its strong condemnation of the violations, interference with the arms presence, dispatch and use of external fighters on Libyan territory.
Kenyan security forces say 6 Al-Shabaab militants have been killed in the northern part of the country. A top official said Kenyan special forces captured 1 militant alive who is currently receiving treatment in Garissa County. He said the timely action by the security forces prevented the loss of innocent Kenyan lives. Kenya's porous border with Somalia is on high alert following a warning by the US Embassy in Nairobi. A few weeks ago, the embassy warned of a possible attack on a major hotel in Kenya. The Somalia-based Al-Shabaab group has carried out several attacks along the border over the past years. In 2018, more than 100 Kenyan security personnel were killed in separate attacks along the Kenya-Somalia border. New Zealand Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says her country still has much more to do to end white supremacism and racism. Ardern's remarks come ahead of the first anniversary of the Christchurch mosque attacks that killed 51 people last year. Ardern said New Zealand has fundamentally changed after the massacre at 2 mosques. In a news conference, she said the country needs to continue challenging the growing threat from far-right groups.
A year on, I believe New Zealand and its people have fundamentally changed. I can't see how you could have an event like this and not. But the challenge for us will be ensuring that in our everyday actions, in every opportunity where we see bullying, harassment, racism, discrimination, calling it out as a nation.
The US says it has imposed sanctions on a subsidiary of Russian oil giant Rosneft to pressure the Venezuelan government. The action is part of an increasing competition between the US and Russia or the South American country. The Treasury Department said it has sanctioned TNK Trading International, which brokers the sale and the transport of Venezuelan crude oil. It blacklisted Rosneft Trading SA, also a Rosneft subsidiary, and its president Didier Casimiro last month. The Treasury has also issued a general license allowing companies to wind down their transactions with RTSA or TTI before May the 20th. Switzerland-based trading company TTI and RTSA handled a large percentage of Venezuelan oil exports last year. In the US, former military intelligence analyst and WikiLeaks source Chelsea Manning has been released from prison. She was remanded for refusing to testify in a US investigation of WikiLeaks and had been held in a Virginia detention center since last May. Manning was due to appear in the court on Friday, but a federal judge ruled that her testimony was no longer needed. The judge then ordered that she can be released immediately. In 2013, Manning was found guilty of espionage for leaking secret military files to WikiLeaks. The former intelligence analyst accrued over $250 in fines for refusing to cooperate with the inquiry into WikiLeaks. The release order comes after her legal team said she had tried to commit suicide and was recovering in the hospital. The EU says it will pay €2,000 each to migrants in camps on Greek islands who are willing to return to their home countries. EU Home Affairs Minister Alvia Johansson announced the scheme in Athens. Johansson said the temporary offer is open for 1 month. Johansson said the scheme is open to people who arrived at the border before January the 1st. At the border itself, Greek forces have used tear gas and water cannon to deter migrants from trying to cross into Europe. Greece says it has stopped 45,000 people from entering the country in the past 2 weeks. Tens of thousands of refugees have been trying to get into Greece since Turkey opened its side of the border. Greece is about to swear in the country's very first woman president as it grapples with the surge of coronavirus cases. Ekaterini Sakellaropoulou will become the new Greek head of the state for a 5-year term. Sakellaropoulou was elected president by the parliament in January after receiving one of the broadest cross-party majorities in Greek history. Until now, the new president was head of Greece's top administrative court, the Council of the State. Although the president is nominally the head of the state and commander-in-chief, the post is largely ceremonial. Greek presidents confirm governments and laws, and technically they have the power to declare war, but only in conjunction with the government. Paris votes in the first round of its mayoral elections on Sunday. The city mayor's office is the country's most high-profile local government job. This time, all 3 candidates are women, which will keep the job in female hands. More in this report.
Months ago, the Paris mayor's office seemed to be within the grasp of President Emmanuel Macron's party. But LREM candidate Benjamin Gruwek's campaign collapsed after a sex scandal involving him emerged in the news. Since then, he's been replaced by Health Minister Agnes Buzyn as the party's candidate.
I'm campaigning focusing on the first round of the election, and my aim is to come first in every district. My goal now is to really talk to the women and men of Paris about my program, which is thorough, which addresses their needs, and to show them what my vision of Paris in the 21st century is.
Buzyn is campaigning on a centrist pitch but has struggled to close the gap with her rivals to the right and left. The current frontrunner is incumbent Mayor Anne Hidalgo from the Socialist Party.
I am active on ecological issues because I realized quickly, first of all as a teenager, but then when I was a councillor before I even became mayor, the impact we have on our environment and the danger we expose living creatures and our own children to.
Then there's Conservative candidate Rashida Dati, who was a justice minister under former President Nicolas Sarkozy. Her ratings have climbed unexpectedly in recent days, with some polls indicating she could win Sunday's polls.
We are still here, more of us than ever, more determined than ever, propelled by a tide which is rising higher every day. They weren't expecting us, they didn't see our forces grow.
All 3 candidates' campaigns are focused on climate issues, cleanliness, and crime. The elections come at a time when coronavirus fears are rising in Europe. As such, voter turnout could be low.
The U.S. Defense Department says it wants to re-evaluate its decision to award a cloud contract to Microsoft. Last October, Microsoft won a $10 billion contract to build a cloud network for the U.S. military. Rival data services provider Amazon filed a lawsuit in the U.S. Code of Federal Claims, contesting the decision, arguing it was politically motivated. The retailer claimed President Donald Trump's personal dislike of Amazon CEO Jeff Bezos influenced the decision. Last month, a U.S. judge issued an order at Amazon's request, temporarily blocking the U.S. military from starting work on the project. The judge said Amazon stood a substantial chance of succeeding in its protests on its merits. Government lawyers have asked the court to send the matter back to the Pentagon for reconsideration. Amsterdam's canal boat rides are one of the city's biggest tourist attractions. Unfortunately, they are powered by diesel, a major contributor to global climate change. The Dutch government has decided to take on the issue, replacing the boat's diesel engines with electric motors.
There are 12,000 recreational boats in Amsterdam that cater to 4 million passengers daily. Only 5% of them are emission-free. Most run on diesel, which contributes to air pollution, water pollution, and global climate change. Taking note of the problem, the authorities have planned to phase diesel engines out of the canals by 2025. They've already launched a floating charging station for electric boats.
Over here, you see the power cables, who connects the batteries with the engine, and most important, the communication cables, so we can read all the data from the batteries and also see if there are any problems with the batteries.
The authorities hope to have 100 charging stations installed by the end of 2021.
Now what this battery does is capture the energy when it's there, capture it off-grid in this battery and move it to the places off-grid again where it's needed. So this is, instead of having all these new power plants and all these new power stations within a city where there's simply not enough room for.
Work is also underway to convert the mostly diesel-based fleet to electric power. 75% of the city's 550 commercial vessels qualify as emission-free. Officials are already working on the transition of the rest to electric power.
Angola has been hard hit by climate change. After years of drought, the country has lost most of its water resources, devastating crops. More in this report.
Climate change has had a devastating impact on the people of Angola's Huila province. Amid the collapse of the agricultural sector, men have migrated to towns and cities in search of work. This has led to the collapse of the local family system, hitting women and girls particularly hard. One local female farmer says the ongoing famine has torn her family apart.
He left because of hunger. There was a time when he used to buy food for the children. They used to share the work, but when the hunger got bad, he decided to go.
An NGO worker explains that when men abandon their families, young girls are forced to step in as surrogate parents.
Because of families being separated or abandoned, we find a lot of families with a single parent. So it is the girls that end up helping their mothers in one way or another. So they are likely to stop studying. They first need to provide for their basic needs.
For now, the situation shows no signs of improvement. On the rare occasion that it does rain, the downpour is so violent, crops suffer even more damage.
We had been waiting for rain for 6 months without rain, and before that we had winter. When the rains came, we were so thankful, we were relieved, but they came too hard and then we had no way of tending to our crops. We were not able to get to the fields.
Women make up 80% of the people displaced by climate change. The UN warns 45 million people face a growing malnutrition in southern Africa.
In Chile, an indigenous tribe known as the Yagan are at risk of losing their cultural identity. The group has historically depended on fishing and canoeing. One 71-year-old Yagan Indian has devoted himself to keeping these traditions alive. More in this report.
The Yagan tribe once lived off fishing, paddling their canoes along coastal waterways. Today they depend on tourism, making handicrafts and working as seasonal laborers. The community has shrunk over the decades and only a few hundred Yagan people remain today.
So, the descendants of Yagan people, who are very few due to the events we know about, including the colonization, epidemics, they have practically disappeared, and what is left? Only cultural goods.
Their language, which has no written form, is also at risk of vanishing.
In my opinion, it will disappear because at the moment there are children who want to learn the language, but then when they are teenagers, I think they will feel embarrassed.
In an effort to save Yagan culture, one group of young people has devoted themselves to transmitting their languages to the new generation. Recently, the Chilean government returned several patrimonial pieces that were in a museum for 100 years back to the Yagan.
We have a debt with original peoples. It is the case of the Yagan people.
Representatives of the community hope that with their efforts, the future of the indigenous community will be preserved.
More stories to follow, but right after a short break. Lows on the highs of the business world now. Wall Street stocks have recovered on hopes over the US stimulus package. Traders closed out a week of carnage for the world markets as the coronavirus pandemic fuels fears of a global recession. Airline stocks led the gains, with Delta and United Airlines getting a surge in their shares. The shares of Apple rose nearly 4% as the iPhone maker announced the reopening all 42 of its branded stores in China. The indices of S&P 500 and Nasdaq Composite landed over 3% higher. The Dow Jones Industrial Average Index also traded nearly 3% in upward territory. European markets are trading higher as regional stocks attempt to rally after their worst sell-off in history. The coronavirus pandemic continues to dominate investor sentiment with mounting fears of a global recession. London's FTSE 100 has gained nearly 8%, while the CAC 40 in Paris is trading over 7% higher. Frankfurt's DAX is also trading nearly 7% higher. Oil prices were also up more than 5%. The European Central Bank says the euro area GDP growth is projected to fall to less than 1% from its previous forecast for 2020 over the coronavirus pandemic. The bank's president, Christine Lagarde, says the projections suggest muted growth in the first half of the year, followed by the improvement in the second. The ECB has kept its key interest rates unchanged while announcing new stimulus to back the Eurozone financial system against COVID-19. Refinancing and interest rates on marginal lending and deposits have been kept at 0%, 0.25% and negative 0.5%. In the meantime, EU manufacturing output slipped 1.5% in January from the same month last year. Eurostat says the calendar-adjusted industrial production index fell to 102 points in January 2020.
The latest indicators suggest a considerable worsening of the near-term growth outlook. The disruption of supply chains is impeding production plans in the manufacturing sector, while necessary containment measures against the further spread of the coronavirus are adversely affecting economic activity.
Cryptocurrencies have lost $93.5 billion in the last 24 hours following the global stock sell-off. Industry site CoinDesk says major cryptocurrency Bitcoin dropped by 48%. In the past few years, Bitcoin has been seen as digital gold and becomes something of a safe haven asset in which to park money. But after losing most of its gains for the year, it has now been labeled as risky an asset as equity. Other cryptocurrencies have followed the suit, with Ethereum tanking 49%. And now the weather situation from around the globe. And that's all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at Indus.News.